Page 151. Pilgrims, Indians, and Puritans. Like the Jamestown colonists, the Pilgrims have picked a poor site. The New England coast is cold and wind-whipped. The land is rocky. The soil is thin. But these industrious people will use the sea and the forest to sustain themselves. Soon they will be shipping fish, furs, and lumber back to England. Without the Indians, they may not have survived. Picture this scene. Pilgrims are struggling to find ways to live in this difficult region. When out of the woods strides a tall man in deerskin clothes. They are astounded when he greets them. "Welcome, Englishmen," he says. His name is Samoset, and he has learned some English from fishermen and traders. Page 152. Samoset returns with 60 Indians, a chieftain named Massasoit, and an Indian whom the settlers named Squanto. Squanto speaks English well. He had been kidnapped by sailors, taken to London, befriended by a London merchant, and then returned to his native land. Trumpet and drums are played as the Pilgrims' governor, John Carver, leads Massasoit to his house, kisses his hand, as is proper to a king, offers refreshments, and writes a treaty of peace between the Indians and the English. While Massasoit is alive, the peace will be kept. Squanto stays with the settlers. To the Pilgrims, he was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. He directed them how to set, which means plant their corn, where to take fish, catch fish, and to procure other commodities, as was also their pilot to bring them to unknown places. In 1621, after the first harvest, the Pilgrims invite their Indian friends to a 3-day feast of Thanksgiving. In 1 year, they have accomplished much. The Pilgrims are frugal, but the celebration is usually generous. They will need their food to get through the winter and to help feed the new colonists who are beginning to arrive. William Bradford, who is elected governor when John Carver dies suddenly, keeps a record of the arrivals. When the ship Fortune docks, he writes, "There was not so much a biscuit cake, neither had they any bedding, not pot or pan." Abram Pierce, a black indentured servant, is one of those who comes in 1623. A few years later, he will own land, vote, and be a respected member of the community. The new arrivals bring reports from England that are not good. Now the Puritans are in trouble. The Puritans are also called saints, but they are more moderate than the Pilgrims. Remember, Puritans don't want to separate themselves from the Church of England. They want to purify the church. What they really want is to control the Church of England. Of course, King James and those in charge don't want that at all. The Puritans can't stand King James, and he doesn't like them either. Of the Puritans, he says, "I will make them conform themselves, or else I will harry them out of this land." The Puritans can see that King James isn't good for the England's economy. First there is inflation and then a depression. James has brought his big spending friends to England from Scotland, where he is also king. They are getting special favors. The Puritans are not. And so a group of Puritans gathers at Cambridge University, where most of them have gone to college, and makes plans to sail to America. The Puritans are better educated than the Pilgrims, and richer too. John Winthrop, the leader, is a lawyer, born on a manor with servants and tenants. When King James dies in 1625 and Charles I becomes king, things get even worse for the Puritans. So I'm on page 154, Giving Thanks. The story of the first American Thanksgiving was held at Plymouth Colony. The story that the first American Thanksgiving was held at Plymouth Colony is a real turkey. In 1540, long before the Pilgrims sat down to their big dinner, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado and his men conducted a Thanksgiving service in their camp at Palo Duro Canyon. in what is now known as the Texas Panhandle. Half a century before the Pilgrims landed, French Huguenots settled near today's Jacksonville, Florida. They sang a psalm of thanksgiving unto God, beseeching him to continue his accustomed goodness towards us. Unfortunately for the French, the goodness did not continue. The colony was wiped out by Spanish raiders. Still, some Floridians claim that as the first American Thanksgiving. A group of English Catholics arrived in Maine in 1605, said prayers of thanks, faced a year of Maine weather, changed their minds about living in America, and sailed back to England. But some maniacs, yes, that's what they are called, say that their state had the first Thanksgiving. 2 years before the feast in Massachusetts, the settlers at Berkeley Hundred on the James River in Virginia decreed that the day of their landing, December 4th, 1619, shall be yearly and perpetually kept holy as a day of thanksgiving. Did they have a feast? It depends on whom you ask at Berkeley Plantation. There is no documented record of one. Now, to give the pilgrims their due, they did eat a big meal, and one of them, Edward Winslow, wrote 6 sentences about it. None of the other claimants can say that. Those pilgrims needed a good meal. Fewer than half of the 102 passengers who came on the Mayflower in 1620 survived their first American winter. The local Indians weren't in good shape either. They had been hard hit, by diseases brought by French fishermen who had made contact 4 years earlier. The English colonists wouldn't have survived at all, and they knew it. I'm at the top of page 155. If it hadn't been for corn and other help from the Indians. And Massasoit was forever grateful to Winslow, who made a nourishing broth that helped him recover from a serious illness. Goodwill, necessity, and plain good sense seemed to have made them all good neighbors. So when harvest time arrived in 1621, the Pilgrims had much to be thankful for. They had made a start at a beaver trade. They lived in peace with the Native Americans. 11 houses had been built, and, thanks to Squanto, the corn harvest was good. They had celebrated harvest time in Holland, and they wished to continue that tradition. They invited Massasoit to join them. He came with 90 hungry Indians. They might have wiped out the larder, but the Indians went and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor. Winslow writes, "We don't know exactly what the Pilgrims cooked, but ducks, geese, turkeys, clams, eels, lobsters, squash, wild grapes, dried fruit, and cornbread are all good guesses, along with watercress and other select herbs." Winslow says, "Our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might, after a special manner, rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as, with a little help besides, served the company almost a week." That's as detailed as it gets, with his addition, "For 3 days we entertained and feasted." That's all we know? That's it, except for a brief word from Governor William Bradford, who doesn't write specifically about a feast with the Indians, but he does say that they began now to gather in the small harvest they had. All summer there was no want, and now began to come in store of fowl as winter approached, of which this place did abound. And besides waterfowl, there were great stores of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison, etc. Besides, they had about a peck of meal a week to a person, and now since harvest Indian corn in that proportion. Did they eat cranberries, which were thick in the nearby bogs, or pumpkin pie? Not likely. You need sugar for those dishes, and they didn't have any. As devout Christians, the Pilgrims gave thanks before each meal, but this was a harvest festival, not primarily a celebration of thanks to God, and it probably came at the end of September. Still, all in all, the spirit was the same as at today's November festival, where we give thanks, we remember, we enjoy, and we eat. The first national Thanksgiving was actually proclaimed by George Washington in 1789. But Thanksgiving was not celebrated officially again until Abraham Lincoln, urged on by a magazine editor, Sarah J. Hale, decreed a national holiday in 1863. Since then, it's been turkey all the way.